The night was still. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. The silence was broken by the low hum of an engine. A van, black as night, crept down the road.
I hate this. I hate the way my hands tremble. I hate the way my breath catches in my throat.
Easy, kid. You're gonna blow the whole thing if you don't relax.
Greg exuded a quiet confidence, a sense of control that Jonas desperately envied. He'd done this a dozen times before. For him, it was just another job. But for Jonas, tonight was different. Tonight was his initiation.
Just focus on the girl.
Greg nodded towards a picture taped to the dashboard. Emma, 12 years old. Innocent eyes stared out from the photo, oblivious to the darkness closing in. She was their target, the daughter of Richard Miller, CEO of Miller Tech.
Remember the plan. We grab the girl, lay low for a few days, then make the call. No complications.
Jonas swallowed hard, trying to ignore the knot of fear twisting in his gut. He just had to remember. This was just a job that would change his life forever. The van rolled to a stop, its headlights momentarily illuminating a house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The numbers on the curb were barely visible in the darkness, but Jonas made out 147. He double-checked the address scrawled on the back of Emma's photo.
This is it.
Good. Get in, grab the girl, and get out. 5 minutes tops.
He tossed Jonas a roll of duct tape and a syringe filled with a milky liquid.
You know what to do.
Jonas nodded, his stomach churning. He wasn't cut out for this. He wasn't like Greg. He stepped out of the van and into the still night air. The sweet scent of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of fear that filled his mouth. He forced himself to move, his footsteps silent on the pavement as he made his way towards the darkened house.
The air inside was stale and cold, thick with the silence of a house asleep. He crept through the darkness, his hand trailing along the wall for guidance. He could hear his own pulse pounding in his ears, each beat a deafening drum in the stillness. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, the sound amplified in the quiet. He found the stairs and ascended slowly, each step a nerve-wracking creak. He reached the top of the landing and paused, listening for any sound that might betray his presence. There was nothing but the soft whisper of the wind outside. He moved down the hallway, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He found the room at the end of the hall. It was a child's room, filled with stuffed animals and the faint scent of vanilla. A single bed sat against the far wall, a small figure huddled beneath the covers. Jonas's heart hammered in his chest. He scooped the child up in his arms, surprised by her weight. She didn't stir, didn't make a sound. He quickly wrapped her in the blanket, careful to cover her face. He moved quickly now, his heart hammering against his ribs. Back down the stairs, through the darkened living room, and out into the cool night air. He practically ran to the van, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He threw open the back door and practically shoved the child into the seat. He slammed the door shut and scrambled into the passenger seat, his body trembling with adrenaline. The silence in the van was deafening. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a sleeping child. It was the unnerving silence of something off. Jonas felt a chill crawl down his spine, raising goosebumps on his arms. He risked another glance at the bundled figure in the back, his unease growing with every passing second. He thought about the weight of the child in his arms. It felt wrong, heavier than a 12-year-old should be. "She's awfully quiet back there," Jonas finally choked out, his voice trembling. "You sure you gave her enough of that sedative?" The van rumbled down the deserted highway, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers battling a light drizzle. Jonas kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was a maelstrom of doubt and unease. He couldn't shake the image of the girl's hand, limp and lifeless, dangling from the bundle in the back. It seemed wrong, too still, too pale. He snuck another glance at the rearview mirror, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The girl hadn't moved an inch. Her small form lay engulfed in the blankets, an unsettling stillness radiating from her. Even in the dim light of the van, Jonas could have sworn her skin seemed unusually pale, almost translucent.
You okay back there, kid?
Just Never seen someone sleep so soundly, that's all.
The highway gave way to a narrow road that snaked through a thick forest. The trees pressed close to the asphalt, their branches forming a dark canopy overhead, blotting out the moon and plunging the van into an oppressive gloom. The wind howled outside, a mournful sound that sent shivers down Jonas's spine. It felt as if the forest itself was watching them, its unseen eyes filled with disapproval. The silence inside the van was broken only by the occasional creak and groan of the vehicle as it navigated the uneven terrain. Jonas jumped at every sound, his nerves stretched taut as piano wire. He could have sworn he heard a faint rustling coming from the back, like something shifting beneath the blankets.
Did you hear that?
Greg, who had been dozing in the passenger seat, grunted and cracked open an eye. Hear what?
Jonas fished the crumpled photo of Emma from his pocket. He stared at the image, the girl's innocent smile a stark contrast to the growing dread twisting in his gut. Her bright eyes seemed to mock him, accusing him of a crime he hadn't yet fully comprehended. He tried to reconcile the girl in the photo with the unsettling stillness of the figure in the back. He thought back to the moment he'd snatched her from the house, the weight, the unnatural silence, the way her body felt oddly cold and stiff in his arms. Doubt morphed into a chilling certainty that sent a wave of nausea crashing over him. He had to be sure. He owed it to himself, to the girl in the back, even to Emma, whose life was now intertwined with his own in this nightmare. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he might find.
She's not Emma.
You've made a terrible mistake.
The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the bundle in the back seat. Jonas held his breath, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Slowly, cautiously, he peeled back the blanket, revealing the face of the child beneath. It wasn't Emma. The girl in the back seat was about the right age, her features delicate and childlike, but her hair, instead of Emma's sunny blonde, was a shock of jet black, framing a face as pale as moonlight, and her eyes were open, staring up at him with a chilling intensity that sent a jolt of pure terror through his veins. They were not the eyes of a child.
Almost there, kid. This is where the fun begins.
The old warehouse loomed in the distance, a skeletal silhouette against the storm-brewing sky. Rain lashed down, blurring the world outside the van into streaks of grey and black. Jonas felt a tremor of foreboding, a primal instinct screaming at him to turn back, to escape while he still could. Greg, oblivious to Jonas's growing terror, hummed along to a song on the radio, his fingers drumming a steady beat against the steering wheel. The van screeched to a halt in the shadow of the warehouse, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon in the night. Greg killed the engine, and an eerie silence descended, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the metal roof. Jonas hesitated, his hand frozen on the door handle. His gaze darted around the shadowy interior of the warehouse, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and a cold dampness clung to his skin like a shroud.
Come on, kid, give me a hand. What the...
Greg wasted no time. He yanked open the back door, grabbed the girl, and hauled her out of the van. Jonas reluctantly followed suit, his gaze fixed on the girl. Even in the dim light, he could see a faint luminescence emanating from her, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed around them. Greg dumped the girl unceremoniously onto a dusty mattress in the corner. He fumbled in his pocket for a length of rope, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous energy that mirrored Jonas's own growing terror. As Greg bent over the girl, her eyes snapped open. They glowed with an unnatural light, illuminating the warehouse with an eerie, otherworldly radiance.
A blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence.
The girl rose, contorting and stretching into a grotesque figure.
Her shadow, it's no longer a reflection. It's writhing like a sentient entity.
The shadow reached out with inky tendrils towards Greg.
Greg, watch out!
Greg struggled, his face contorted in a silent scream. His pleas were swallowed by the oppressive silence.
The air, it's crackling with unseen energy.
The light flickered violently, casting a strobe-like effect.
I have to escape this nightmare.
Jonas scrambled backward, his heart pounding, but his limbs felt heavy, anchored by an unseen force. The girl turned, her head snapping in Jonas's direction with an unnatural swiftness. Her eyes, now glowing orbs of malevolent light, locked onto his, and a cold dread washed over him, chilling him to the bone.
You should not have taken what was not yours.
A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. Her lips peeled back in a grotesque mockery of a smile, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth that glinted in the flickering light.
Oh no, 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 no.
Jonas stumbled back, his foot catching on a loose floorboard. He fell to the ground with a thud, his gaze never leaving the terrifying creature that advanced towards him, her shadow stretching out before her like a harbinger of doom.
Now you shall pay the price.
He was trapped, caught in a nightmare of his own making. And as the shadows closed in around him, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that there would be no escape. The warehouse air grew heavy, thick with the stench of decay and a cloying sweetness that made Jonas gag. The girl, no longer resembling a child in any way, towered over him. Her form flickered and shifted in the dim light, a grotesque puppet show illuminated by the strobing bulb.
This can't be real.
Her limbs elongated, impossibly thin, ending in claws that scraped against the concrete floor. Her jaw unhinged, stretching her mouth into a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-like teeth. A low growl rumbled deep within her chest, a sound that vibrated in Jonas's bones, shaking him to his core.
What are you?
Jonas scrambled back, his breath catching in his throat. He pressed himself against the cold concrete floor, desperate to get away, to disappear into the shadows. But there was nowhere to go. The warehouse, once a potential hiding place, was now a prison, a cage where he was the prey.
What are you?
He knew the answer, knew that whatever this creature was, it was not of this world. It was something ancient, something evil, and he had ripped it from its slumber.
The creature tilted its head, regarding Jonas with a chilling curiosity. Its eyes, two burning embers in the darkness, seemed to see right through him, into the darkest recesses of his soul. The putrid stench of decay intensified, making his eyes water. "I am what you should have feared," the creature hissed, its voice a grating rasp that scraped against his eardrums. "I am the guardian of the forgotten, the keeper of secrets best left buried." It leaned closer, its breath hot and fetid on Jonas's face. "You stole into my domain, took what was not yours," it continued, its voice a low growl that reverberated through Jonas's body. "You sought a prize, a ransom for a life you deemed valuable. But some things, little thief, are not meant to be bought or sold."
Jonas squeezed his eyes shut, a sob escaping his lips. He was going to die here, in this forgotten warehouse, at the hands of a creature out of a nightmare. His last thoughts were of Emma, the girl whose photo he still clutched in his hand. He prayed she was safe, prayed that his mistake wouldn't cost her life. Jonas felt a cold dread grip him as the creature raised its hand, its claws glinting in the flickering light. He wanted to scream, to beg for his life, but terror had stolen his voice. But the blow never came. The creature hesitated, its head tilting as if listening. Jonas cracked open his eyes, his heart pounding. The creature was no longer focused on him. A low moan, filled with pain and terror, echoed from the darkness at the back of the warehouse. Jonas's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Greg. He had forgotten about Greg. Greg stumbled into the circle of light, his clothes torn, his face a mask of pure terror. He was covered in a slimy, phosphorescent residue that glowed faintly in the dim light, illuminating the horror in his eyes. Whatever had happened back there, in the darkness beyond the reach of the single light bulb, it had broken him.
The creature turned back to Jonas, and a slow, cruel smile spread across its face. It licked its lips, its tongue long and forked like a serpent's. "It seems," it hissed, its voice dripping with amusement, "that you have brought me a gift."
Jonas stared from the creature to Greg, his mind reeling. He had thought he was going to die here, a sacrifice to his own greed and stupidity. But now, as he looked at Greg, his former partner, his mentor in this nightmare, he realized that sometimes the price of survival was far more terrifying than death itself. Oh no, Greg!
Jonas watched in mute horror as the creature, with a speed that defied comprehension, lunged at Greg. Its clawed hand, a blur of motion, plunged into Greg's chest, eliciting a strangled gasp that died in his throat. Greg's eyes, moments ago filled with primal fear, now held a chilling emptiness, reflecting the utter annihilation of his soul. The air, already thick with the stench of decay and fear, grew heavy with the metallic tang of blood.
I can't move.
The creature, its arm buried deep within Greg's chest, lifted its head, and a low growl, a sound of primal satisfaction, reverberated through the warehouse, shaking Jonas to his core. Jonas wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but witness the macabre spectacle unfolding before him. But his body, paralyzed by terror, refused to obey his commands. He was a puppet, his strings pulled by the unseen hand of fear, forced to watch as the creature, with a strength that belied its slender frame, lifted Greg's lifeless body from the ground. Greg's head lolled at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring blindly into the darkness, his face frozen in a silent scream that echoed Jonas's own unspoken terror.
Please, no!
The creature turned, its gaze cold and calculating, fixing on Jonas. Its mouth, now smeared with Greg's blood, curved into a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It took a step towards Jonas, and the shadows on the walls seemed to writhe and twist, mirroring its movements, as if celebrating the imminent demise of their shared prey.
You are different. You did not come for riches, for power. You came for something else.
Jonas shrank back against the wall, his heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic drummer. He knew what the creature was talking about. The reason he had agreed to this job, the reason he had been willing to risk everything, was not for the money, not for the thrill, but for a chance to escape the suffocating ordinariness of his life. He had craved something more, something dark and dangerous, something that would make him feel truly alive, and he had found it in the most terrifying way imaginable. The creature tossed Greg's body aside as if it were nothing more than a discarded toy. It took a step closer to Jonas, its shadow falling over him like a shroud. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made Jonas's skin crawl.
You sought a taste of the darkness, and now the darkness has found you.
Suddenly, the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered and died, plunging the warehouse into an impenetrable darkness.
No, please!
Jonas cried out, his voice swallowed by the suffocating blackness. He was alone, trapped in the abyss with a creature from his darkest nightmares. He could feel its presence, cold and predatory, moving around him, toying with him, savoring his terror. He scrambled back, his hands scraping against the rough concrete floor, his heart pounding against his ribs like a wild thing trying to escape its cage. He had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that had cost him everything. And now, as the creature closed in, he knew with a bone-chilling certainty that he would pay the price for his greed, his desperation, his yearning for something more. He would pay the price in fear, in darkness, in the suffocating embrace of the unknown. Weeks later, the authorities caught up with the whispered story. They found the warehouse shrouded in unnatural stillness. Dust covered every surface. The van sat abandoned, a rusting tomb.
Over here, look at this.
Inside, a faded photograph lay on the dashboard. Emma's smiling face stared up from the grime. But of Jonas and Greg, there was no sign. They had vanished without a trace. Back in the quiet suburban home, life returned to normal. Emma played in her room, oblivious to the horrors. The swing set swayed gently, a reminder of the night the darkness came. Somewhere a voice whispered, a chilling reminder of debts never erased. The darkness lingers, waiting for its next opportunity.